Okay, welcome back to part 2 of the home video lecture. Last video we reviewed how arrays and for loops are made, and in this video we're going to be exploring a way we can have them interact with each other in really useful ways that can save us a lot of time and allow us to do a whole lot of work with relatively little effort. So I'm going to go ahead and make my globals, make my void setup, and my void draw, like I always do. So in this project, we're going to be creating multiple arrays, and these arrays are going to be holding the x and y position of objects that we're going to draw on our screen. So we know that normally, let's say like an ellipse or a rectangle takes an x and a y position. So if we wanted to draw an ellipse, we would have to create variables that would represent the x and the y. And if I wanted to have, a couple hundred ellipses appear on my screen at the same time, I'd need to make a couple hundred variables, and that's really not practical. So instead, I'm going to make two int arrays, or integer arrays. I'm going to call them xpos and ypos. And these are going to hold the x positions and the y positions of multiple ellipses. So in my globals, I declare my arrays, and then in my setup, I actually make them. So remember, you need to first tell the computer what kind of array it is and give it a name. Then in setup, we say xpos equals new int, and then we open the square brackets and we say how big we want our array to be. So in this case, I'm going to start with 10. So I make each array the same size, 10. And now I have two empty arrays that can hold 10 integers. They don't have anything in them right now. They're empty arrays, but they have room for up to 10. So let's go ahead and populate those arrays. We're going to do that in setup as well. I'm going to make a for loop that will count to 10 using I, and I is less than 10. So remember, we start from 0, so we're going to have I equals 0, I is less than 10, so it's going to go from 0 to 9. And then for each of those values of I, I'm going to create a number, an integer, and assign it to the xpos and the ypos index at I. So starting at 0, I'm going to go to xpos 0 and give it a random number, and then I'm going to go to ypos 0 and give it a random number as well. Remember, I made these integer arrays, so I need to cast the random into an int, which is why I'm doing this open parentheses int close parentheses, because random by default gives you a float instead, and we don't want floats, we want integers. So xpos and ypos, each at the I slot, is getting a random integer somewhere between 0 and 500, because that's how big my screen is. Realistically, I really should, instead of saying 500, I'm going to use width and height. This makes my program a little bit more versatile. I could change the size of my screen, and I wouldn't have to change the rest of my code. So there we go. I have everything set up, and I have three places. I have where I declare my array, where I define my array, and then where I populate my array. You need to do all three of these things before you have a full functioning array in your program. You can't skip a step, otherwise it's not going to work. So let's head on down to draw, and I'm going to make another for loop. It's going to be very similar to the one in setup. Int I equals 0, I is less than 10, I plus plus. And then I'm going to open up, draw an ellipse, and then I'm going to draw the ellipse at xpos I and ypos I. So it's going to pull the x and the y position from the two arrays and draw an ellipse at that location. Let's go ahead and just fill it. I'll just fill it with random colors. This will give a nice sort of disco effect for the circles. And I'm just going to give them random values between 0 and 255 for the red, green, and the blue values. Okay, so I've made my ellipse. I'll close my curly brackets to finish my for loop. Let's go ahead and see how this looks when I run it. In an ideal world, I should have 10 circles that are flashing random colors. And sure enough, there they are. So I can see there's 10 ellipses on my screen, and they're flashing random colors, and they're in random locations. So if I were to run this program again, they would appear in new locations because it's random every time. And there we go. You can see every time I run this, the ellipses appear in a random location. All right. So you guys can sort of play around with this. I'm going to say this is the end of part 2. There are some questions down below that will have you altering this code to make it do different things. So please go ahead and finish that. Enter your answers to the right